Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first session of the Women of Publishing Leadership series. We're really excited to have you here today. Going to,
Oh, there we are.
yeah, there we are. Great. Hi.
Hi, everyone.
The webinar series was created to help women leaders develop their skills in digital strategy and to propel their businesses in the digital economy. I'm Jill DeBartok. I lead up our SMB partner sales team here at Google, and this is Sarah. I'll introduce her more in a minute, but I wanted to just talk about the intent behind the masterclass series. It's designed for small and medium businesses, are women-led, less than 500 employees, displaying strong female leadership, or have predominantly a female audience. Women from all types of digital backgrounds are here today: news, entertainment, video, app, e-commerce. We have about 45 minutes for the webinar, and we'll leave some question and answer time at the end. So again, I'd like to introduce Sarah Carpenter. She's our manager of scalable acquisitions at Google. And Sarah, I thought we would start off with a fun fact. So why don't you share a little something about yourself?
All right. Like work fun or like personal fun?
Let's do one of both.
Okay. So personal fun fact which is really odd, is when I eat too much, I sneeze. So I guess I'm like allergic to eating too much. So and I get this from my dad's side of the family. So Thanksgiving is a mess at my dad's side of the family. So that's if you speak to the people on my team, they'll say oh yeah, Sarah, she's sneezing in the pod, she had an extra snack, she just really overdid it.
Okay.
So that's a personal one. Work fun fact, I've been at Google 4 years as of this upcoming July. And in the 4 years, I've had 5 different jobs.
Wow.
All within the online partnerships group, all working with publishers, but 5 different jobs in 4 years, which the content in this training we're going to be going through really, really is important to me and resonates with me, because I don't think I would have been able to successfully make those transitions and really focus on what I want to do and be within my career without the stuff that's in this training.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
All right. So let's jump right in.
Cool. Share our screen. Awesome. Okay. So this is the first of 4 in the Women of Publishing Masterclass series. And so this one is specifically called Planning for Growth. One caveat I want to give is this is not a specific marketing or business tactic that we're going to be talking about. So not something like how to reach more customers or we're on mute. It looks like
maybe, well, if anyone in the chat, can you hear us? If you can't, obviously we won't see a response, but if you can, could you respond in the chat?
Okay.
Great. Thank you,
awesome.
Lee.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to dive in. So I'll repeat a little bit. So this is our first of 4 masterclass training series. Hence it's the first, so that's why we are having the mild technical difficulties at the beginning. But my name is Sarah Carpenter. I lead the Scalable Acquisitions business here in North America at Google. One caveat that I want to give before we dive into the material is that this is really going to be a discussion on how to approach business problems. So not a specific marketing or business tactic per se, such as how do you reach customers better, or how can you do a better SWOT analysis, for example, but instead a way to approach problem solving and challenges that really enables you and your teams to be more effective and efficient. One thing that we experience a lot here at Google is a constant flow of ambiguous problems where they are the first time we've seen them. It's something we've never done before. And in order to be effective in that, you have to have a pretty resilient problem-solving strategy. And for me personally, I've in my 4 years at Google, I've had 5 different roles, and being able to transition between those and be effective both for my team as well as our partners has been really dependent upon some of the training material that we're going to go through. So this is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to be going through it with you. All right. So from an agenda perspective, it looks like our slides are not moving forward on the, there we go. Okay, there's
just a little delay.
Okay, so from an agenda perspective, there's going to be a couple of different kind of mentalities that we're going to go through. So one is a player mindset. Second is called your job is not your job. Third, we're going to go into something called player versus victim. And then lastly, wrap it up with commitment conversations. Okay, so first let's dive into the player mindset. This is something that I think is super, super important when approaching tough problems. So if you look at this slide, there are a lot of different quotes of them, many of which my managers at Google have actually said to me when I've been in tough situations. So these are some examples of people leveraging what we like to call the player mindset. So let's read through some of these quotes on the screen. If you're not making mistakes, then you're not doing anything. I'm a positive doer that makes mistakes. So that's from John Wooden. Another one is, if you don't fail 90% of the time, then you aren't aiming high enough. That's from Alan Clay. And then the last one I'd like to reference is, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. And that's from Michael Jordan. So a key theme that runs through all of these quotes is that in order to be successful, you have to be comfortable with making a lot of mistakes. So fully taking ownership of them and then learning from them to make you better. And that is really what embodies the player mindset. An example of when this has been relevant specifically for me, like this comfort with mistakes, this of being able to really embrace them. So one of my 4 jobs at Google has been leading global programmatic direct strategy for the online partnerships group. And essentially, it was my job to design and deploy strategies to grow product adoption for a specific product across our partners. And with that, like when we're looking at product adoption, we really look at 2 things. So who is going to be a good fit for the product, that the product is truly going to make their business better, and that they're going to see positive benefits, and also that it's a good fit for Google as well. So part of the first part of that, the identifying who is a good fit, is kind of where I made the mistake a little bit. So I started by talking to a lot of partners to encourage testing of this product. And what I quickly learned was that it's not a good fit for all partners. There was just a couple key characteristics that make a partner a good fit for this product. So with this, realizing the mistake, I had to step back, re-strategize, and then very importantly for the partners that we're testing, that we determined maybe this isn't the best thing, had to communicate that and say, like, I actually think there's other things we can focus on to grow your business. So that's an example for me personally where I made a mistake and learned a lot from it, and then was able to make future actions better based upon the learnings. Whereas if I hadn't wanted to recognize that mistake, it could have resulted in folks adopting a product that might not have been right for their business. So on the other side of the player mindset is something we call the victim mindset. And so let's compare the 2. So if you look on the left side of this slide, what you'll see is that with the victim mindset, there's an inherent belief that you're born with your skills as they are. And so any failure reflects who you are as a person. And that feels pretty bad. That means that every time there is a mistake, it feels like it hurts. And it feels like it can impact how you see yourself, your perception of if you're successful or not, which is pretty negative. And so when you have a victim mindset, what are a couple of things that can happen? So it might cause you to avoid challenges because of fear of failure, or it might result in you being relatively quick to give up because something seems really, really hard. Um, and what the thing that I notice with the victim mindset is it often feels like you're not in control and that things are just happening to you. So that's something and that I've certainly experienced when you're experiencing a problem that's really really tough to solve. An example of this could be if, for example, a client asks you for a really tough deliverable. One way to approach it could be quickly thinking of all the reasons why it can't be done or why it's frustrating, rather than thinking through how it can be done and why the client is asking for it. So those are some examples of when a victim mindset might be present. On the other side of this slide, we have the player mindset. And the big differentiator here is with a player mindset, you feel okay with failure because that's a signal for you that you can grow. And then the traits on the right are very, very different than what is on the left. So challenge is not scary. It's just an exciting learning opportunity. It's okay to keep getting up when there's a mistake. And one thing that I really like, one that's really personal for me, is the seeking out feedback. So feedback is sometimes seen as a bad thing. But I want to call out that I find feedback to be an incredible thing. And to take that a step further, I find that developmental and constructive feedback is by far the most powerful thing in enabling me to grow within my own personal career. So for a quick example, last performance review cycle, my director, who actually originally delivered this training to me and my team, he spent maybe 5 minutes saying like the good things I'd done. Here are the great things you've done in the past performance cycle. But the remaining 25 to 30 minutes, he was telling me all of the ways that I could be better. And it was actually a really great conversation and it felt really good. And I left feeling very empowered and excited about it based upon his encouragement of a player mindset that really, really enabled me to embrace the feedback. And so the main takeaway here is if with the player mindset, you're okay with failure and feedback because it means that you can learn and grow and then continually increase your effectiveness over time. Okay, so let's take a minute to think about it. I'd love for everyone to just think to themselves an example of when you've had a victim mindset and when you've had a player mindset. And then also think about how has that made you feel? In which mindset have you been more successful in reaching your business goals? And we'll give everyone about a minute or so. Okay, so that's kind of, and we're there throughout the rest of the training, we're going to be going through a couple more building blocks. So player mentality is the first building block to think through and increasing the effectiveness in problem solving from a business capacity. The second one is what we call is your job is not your job. And so that sounds really silly to say. It sounds weird, right? Well, it is also 100% true. If you look at the two folks on the screen and you think, what are their jobs? You see on the left, Messi, who's without a doubt one of the best soccer players in the world and in the history of the world. And if you were to ask someone, what is his job? Then they would probably say, oh, he scores goals. Like his job is to score goals. Same if you look at the photo on the right, that's Tim Howard, also a professional soccer player. And if you were to ask what is his job, the answer that most people would say is, oh, he's a goalie. He keeps balls from getting into the net. And those are both true. But those are also more their titles. But if you think about what their actual jobs are, is to help their teams win. And so that could mean that if, say, it's the end of a game and you're down by one, like the goalie can actually, because his ultimate job is to help the team win, run completely out of the goal and halfway down the field to kick the ball in order to try to score another goal on the other side. So point being here is that their jobs are not just what is their titles. Their jobs are the purpose. So why are they in that job? So next slide, please. And then when you think about our job here, like in what we're doing today, just with this training, our job isn't to run the training. It's to engage the audience. It's to provide really compelling material that encourages people to think about how they approach problems. It helps our partners increase their effectiveness in how they think about problem solving. When I think about this for myself, I could say, if someone said, what is my job? I could say, I'm a scalable acquisitions manager. And that's my title, and that's true, that's factual. But what my job really is to enable thousands of content creators worldwide to find our monetization products so that they can grow their businesses. And so the one final point I want to make on this building block of the training is, when you think about your job as a title, that somewhat puts you in a box, because it almost limits what you feel like you can and cannot do as a lever to have impact. But however, if you think about your job as to purpose behind it, so for me, my job is to ultimately help content creators grow their businesses. That's the why. And that opens up so many more possibilities in how you get it done, which I find to be extremely empowering. And so if you have that player mindset that we talked about first, you're going to learn and grow and make a lot of mistakes along the way. So we're going back to player versus victim, our third building block, because we're going to go into some examples, and we're actually going to look at this in practice. So for example, if you see that we might have a pin fall on the ground, and then if it falls on the ground, someone would say, why does the pin fall? So if you're on the live chat and you want to participate, so if a pin falls and we were to say, why does the pin fall? What would your response be? We'll give it like a couple seconds. Gravity. Okay, thank you, Stacy. Next slide, please. So one way to look at it is gravity. Gravity made the pin fall. Another way and that is 9 times out of 10, what we think of when it's like, oh, gravity did it, which is true. That's certainly true. But if you want to feel more empowered about the situation, you could say, I dropped it, or someone dropped it. And if you're then taking ownership of like, I dropped it, and granted, this is a somewhat extreme example, then I dropped it, you feel more ownership over that. It's more empowering that you had control over the situation. Next slide. An example that I have to think of a lot, because I spend so much time in meetings, is if I come late to a meeting, if someone were to say, why are you late to this meeting? A lot of times the answer is, well, my last meeting went over. And that could be factual and true. But that also makes me feel like, oh, I didn't have any control in that. I didn't have any choices, when in reality, like ultimately, I chose not to leave the previous meeting, which there's nothing wrong with, like, but also factual. But if I take that, I chose not to leave the other meeting, I feel more in control over the outcome. And also from a perspective, like, say meeting 2 was extremely important and more important than meeting 1. If I take that perspective on the right, then I can actually just choose to leave meeting 1 early and feel better about it, as opposed to feeling like I need to stay. So that's kind of a more work context of what this looks like in practice. So what we're going to do next is watch a video. And so this is an example of a really inspiring young woman who took the player mindset really to 10x and really, really, really had a huge impact.
I often look at the news to find problems around the world. I heard about the Zika virus outbreak and I wanted to use gene editing techniques to help prevent this from happening. And then I heard about Malaysian Airlines going missing. So I created a black box finder. But then I found out about Flint, which was one of the biggest problems I'd ever seen. My name is Gitanjali Rao. I'm a scientist and an inventor. In 2014, Flint switched their water source from Lake Huron to the Flint River, which caused lead contamination in drinking water. The part that hit me the most was that there are all these children who don't deserve unclean water to drink. I wouldn't want that to happen to me or my family, so why should it happen to them? I saw my parents testing for lead and other contaminants in our drinking water, and it wasn't reliable, it was inconvenient.
The current test for lead can take up to 2 weeks. That is quite expensive and it's very laborious to get a result.
So what I wanted to do is create a lead in water detection tool. I came across this new technology using carbon nanotube sensors and wanted to expand the idea to detect lead in drinking water. In the beginning, I wasn't even sure if this idea would even work. I needed guidance and I needed a lab.
When I met Gitanjali, I thought that she conducts herself pretty much like an adult. She's combining the skills of an engineer, of a scientist, of a designer. So we decided to partner up with her because we have a common goal to provide safe drinking water.
When they offered me the lab space, I come home and I start screaming my head off. It's like, or something like that. I was so excited. I knew that if I could get this to work, I could help so many residents of Flint. My device is named Tethys after the Greek goddess of fresh water. To create Tethys, I went through a lot of different versions, and now it's a 3D printed, fully wired device. In order to test for lead in your water using Tethys, you attach a disposable lead sensor cartridge specially treated with chloride ions. If the water has lead, it sticks to the chloride ions and causes resistance to the flow of current. So the more resistance, the more lead. To display the results, I wanted to create an app. So I used Android App Maker because that's what was easiest for me for my first time creating an app. I connected the device to the phone using Bluetooth, and I could see my results of either safe, slightly contaminated, or critical.
She's just amazing. She's taking advantage of that knowledge and that passion to build something that is for the benefit of humanity.
Coming to Flint just makes me want to work harder. People are lined up for hours waiting to get bottled water, which won't even last them a whole month. I know my device only solves a small part of this huge problem. But if people can test their water themselves, that gives them the power to do something about it.
Society tells you that you can't do certain things because you're a child or because you are a female. Seeing someone like Gitanjali, so eager, so smart, so prepared, she's pushing the envelope, not only for herself, but for other generations to come.
चार साल पूरे दुनिया का सफर करूंगा 75
Wow. We're like almost in tears over here. That is, like I said, that's a 10x, like really really doing a big example of that player mindset. And that incredibly impressive young woman really thought of here's this problem, like how can I take ownership and make it better? And so when we think about that and go back to like what are actually the characteristics of victim versus player, on the player side, it's really self-empowering because you feel like you can affect the result, and that really encourages you and enables to take responsibility. And I've found there's been many problems I've worked on at work where I've had more of a victim mindset, and there's also been many problems where I've had player. And I will definitely say that I have felt more empowered, and had a much larger impact when I've thought, okay, what can I take responsibility for here? And that makes me feel better about my impact and my outcome. So what are some, and sometimes, like I said, I've had the victim mentality plenty of times too. It's not a polar one or the other. It's really how you approach each individual problem. And so sometimes I'll have to catch myself when I'm approaching something. And the way that I recognize how I'm approaching something is, how am I talking about it? How am I, what am I saying verbally? And these are some things that'll help me catch, like if I'm being more of a player or if I'm thinking more about what's in a context of victim or what's happening to me. So if I say on the victim side, it's hopeless, what you could turn that around to say, and this is like we've said before, like both things can be factual or reflect your reality, but a more self-empowering way to say that is, I just haven't found a solution yet, and that's okay. Or if you say no one is doing anything about it, you can think, okay, I can take the first step. Or maybe you won't take the first step, but recognizing that you could if you wanted to makes you often feel a lot better about the problem. To say it can't be done, this is similar to the one above, you could say, I just choose not to do it. And we're going to go a little bit more into this in the next section on commitment conversations. And instead of I have to leave, I want to leave. And instead of I don't have time, I choose to focus on other priorities. And then on the same vein, if you want to think about how this sounds from a questions perspective, instead of, and I've said this a couple of times, when I'm in the victim mentality, I feel like everything's happening to me. So in a victim, you might hear, what happened to you? Who's to blame? What did they do wrong? Why did they do it? But within the player mentality, you're thinking through, what can I do now? What can I learn from this? How can I blame myself? And to go back to something we touched on at the beginning, one of the biggest parts of empowering yourself with a player mentality is making it okay to make mistakes. So if you are doing a postmortem on something that maybe didn't go just right, and you're finding ways that you could have been better and to blame yourself for it, that's okay. Like, that's totally okay. And you can learn from that. And I find that to be a lot more inspirational than feeling like something happened to me that I couldn't change anything about. So we're going to wrap up the player versus victim section, and then we'll have one more element to go through. But basically I'd really encourage everyone to do is, when you're approached with a business problem, own the situation, offer a solution, and take responsibility. And I think this is a really great quote that I try to remind myself of is, if you don't feel like part of the solution or the problem, then you can't be part of the solution. So own it. And the last section we're going to have is on commitment conversations. And so this is actually, I think, one of the most important parts of this training. And because if you think like a player all of the time, which is great, I encourage it, that can actually also be incredibly overwhelming, because you might think you have to solve and take responsibility for every single problem that comes across your email or comes across your desk. And that makes it feel like you don't have control over your time, you don't have control over what you're doing, which, when you're focused on work-life balance and being able to prioritize and have the most impact, can be a really kind of claustrophobic feeling if you feel like you have to solve absolutely everything. And so that's why I encourage having really, really thoughtful commitment conversations. So making and keeping commitments is something that is incredibly important. And I think for me personally, something that until I went through this training a couple years ago, and even recently, we had a refresh of this training for our team recently, and this reminded me of this, is I would say just yes all the time. I wouldn't think about what I was actually committing to. And at Google in general, there's definitely a culture of yes, because we want to believe we can do it. We want to believe that we can accomplish everything on our to-do list. And the reality of that is I don't think I've had a single day in my working life where I've accomplished everything on my to-do list. And largely because I'd say 40 to 50% of the stuff on my to-do list, I probably should have never put there in the first place. And so that's why making and then keeping commitments is so important. So we're going to walk through a little bit the importance of having a common language around it, making this a skill that you practice regularly, and then also making this foundational for your entire team so that it's not just you doing it, but the folks that you work with too. Okay, so what is a commitment conversation? A commitment, it's simple. It's just agreeing that you're going to do something. But what we're encouraging and what I try to encourage my team to do and force myself to do is really think through, what am I committing to and what am I saying yes to? Is it reasonable? Is there a deadline? Can I actually meet the deadline? So sometimes the answers to that are, no, I can't meet it. And so that requires a negotiation. And then from a handling commitment breakdowns perspective, the other reality is we're not going to, even if we're thinking really thoughtfully about all of the commitments that we're making, we're not going to make all of them because life happens, things pop up. And so there's going to be points in time where a commitment is going to break down, and that's also okay, as long as we manage it correctly. So I'd like everyone to take 2 to 3 minutes to think of one commitment that you owe someone. So for me, I know there's a decision about the next project my team is going to be working on that I owe my boss, and then a commitment that you did not deliver on or are at risk of not delivering, which for me could be the same one because I need to do that by end of week, and I need to build out time for it. So I'd love everyone to just think of that. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So as you thought through those commitments, one thing that I think is really important is breaking down what a commitment actually is. So it's a request plus a promise. And so there's 3 parts of the request that I think it's really important that we have all of them in order, if we're asking for a commitment or saying yes to a commitment, we understand exactly what we're signing up for. So one is providing context. So that's essentially the why. Like, why is so important? And so earlier I mentioned an example where, say, a client asks for something that seems really, really unreasonable and the deadline seems crazy and you just don't understand why. So the context here is what is important, because if you understand why it's important to their business, then you know how to effectively prioritize it within your list of things to do. The second part is the conditions and stating the conditions. So I request you to do X by Y. By why is really important. And I think for me, this is where I miss a lot is getting the deadlines right. And the by why also is, you should be realistic about that. I tend to say, if someone says, oh, can you do this by end of week? I'll say yes. But I won't double check back to like, what are all the other things that I'm trying to do this week? And make sure that I'm prioritizing effectively and giving a true deadline I can commit to. And then the last is, do you commit to doing to this, asking for a response? The beauty is of signing up for a commitment is unless you say yes, you haven't signed up for it. So this encourages you to think through that. So for these questions, there's actually only a handful of acceptable answers. So you can say yes. The other thing is I strongly recommend, and this is something that I tell my team a lot, is you can say no. So I'll sometimes say to them, is it reasonable to complete this report by the end of next week? And since I'm asking, that means it really opens up the opportunity for them to say, no, Sarah, it's actually not. And if they say that, I'm totally okay with it. I'm just truly asking what is reasonable. So never forget that no should always be a reasonable answer. I need clarification. I counter offer. The unacceptable side of commitments, and this is what you probably hear a lot, is I'll do the best I can. I'll look at it and get back to you and leave it with me. So those are all kind of wishy-washy things that kind of put you in the middle ground of if you're actually going to complete it or not. And that's when, for me, I end up adding a ton of things to my to-do list that I've kind of half committed to, but haven't really thought through if I can accomplish it or not. So the last part that we want to touch on commitments, and I do think that this is a really important piece, is only make the promises you intend to keep. And I find this, when I'm following this, this makes me a lot more intentional with what I'm focused on. And so if I'm saying yes to something, I really try to make sure that I understand it. I truly believe that I can fulfill on that promise, and I'm going to apply my energy to it. If, however, the commitment is at risk, the first thing I want to do is alert the person I committed to. So say it's my team, and let them say I was hypothetically, for example, going to plan an offsite for them for the middle of July, and then we realize that's not going to happen. So that's a lightweight example of me breaking a commitment where I can just say, hey, like, it doesn't look like this is going to happen in July, but like, let's look at early August and get that on the calendar. And if you apologize and explain and then make and you recommit, you really haven't done any damage to the relationship. However, if you don't alert the creditor as early as possible, don't recommit or recontextualize what's doable and what's not, that's where there's potential to lose trust or hurt a relationship, which is ultimately what we don't want to be doing. Okay, so that wraps up the majority of all of the content that we have for today. As I said at the beginning, this is really meant to be a discussion on how to approach problem solving in the most effective way. It's not a rule book. It's not going to fit. Every single problem isn't going to fit perfectly into this framework. But what we wanted to share was just some building blocks and some ideas on how we found it to make us feel empowered and make us feel really inspired to solve problems in a way that's going to make the business better, make the world better, and make our partners better, and wanted to share that with everyone so that they could have these resources as well. So with that, we do have time for questions. So you can drop questions in the live chat, and we're happy to answer them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
While people are thinking of questions, gosh, that video, I found that video so inspirational. I'm so glad that you shared that with us. Okay, so as everyone's thinking of their great questions, let me go ahead and switch the screen to us. Great. And there was a question while we were getting started about, is there a place where we can download the slides? And yes, there is a link to the recorded presentation, and we're going to share that out with you afterwards. So thank you. Another thing that I was thinking when you were talking through this is, personally, often I find myself in a position where, maybe I'm getting asked for certain deliverables and they, tend to come all at once. That's just how the world works sometimes. And I feel this sense of always wanting to say yes because I want the person to know that I am capable and that I can accomplish anything and that I'll figure out a way to make this work and fit in. And so sometimes, especially kind of given the context of our women leadership program here and what we want to do by inviting our women publishers is I often think and wonder, is that a me thing? Is that because I'm a woman? I'm kind of like putting that lens on it. Sometimes it's something that I just think about when I find myself in that moment of saying yes. Not that you have an answer to that, but it's something that I think about. I don't know if our audience does, but worth noting, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we have one question here for you, Sarah. How do you motivate team members to take on the player mindset?
Oh, I think that for me, I try to make it part of a few slides back, we talked about kind of the language around player versus victim and like what you might hear. And so I try to create a culture on my team where if someone says something that is like very player oriented, like how can we solve it? Like I recognize that as like, oh, this is great. Like let's think about how we can solve it. Like let's do a brainstorm together. Like where's a whiteboard? Like let's figure this out. I also like very much, like I mentioned earlier, like when I encourage them to say no to me if they feel like what I'm asking is not reasonable. Like I try to create that open dialogue where it's like they feel that they have that choice. And so what I've found is if my team feels like they're making the choices, they are a lot more empowered to solve the problems that they're working on. And that isn't that can go to extremes. Like so for example, like I said, I lead a scalable acquisitions team. And if someone was like, oh, I actually want to be a Google search engineer and that's the problem I want to solve, like that's kind of out of bounds. Like I can't help them with that. Or I can help them in terms of connecting them with the right resources to learn the skills they need if they eventually wanted to transfer. But like within their current day-to-day, I couldn't really solve that.
Right.
But yeah, so I think making it that they feel they can choose and that they feel empowered and are excited on what they're working on.
Great. That's great. We just read the note from Stacy. You'll be pleased to know that they're teaching player mindset in my daughter's elementary school starting 4th grade. Wow, that's great. That's
that is
really
so
wonderful
cool.
to hear. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, again, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. This will be available. This is the first of the 4 class series. The next one is in mid-July. You'll be getting reminder emails about that. We would love your feedback. We love feedback. As Sarah said, feedback is a gift and everyone needs it, including us, to help make the webinar series beneficial for you and for future attendees as we hope this program lives on for years to come if it's successful. So please provide your feedback to us and we hope you have a great rest of the day. And thanks, Sarah. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.